When have you been genuinely scared for your life? Had a massive asthma attack. As a paramedic myself, when your colleague looks you in the eye as he's sticking defib patches to your chest L and radios for a 2-crew cardiac arrest backup, you know it's not good. Especially seeing as they can't use medical jargon around me as I already know it, so I know what a silent chest means. You're not moving any air. I know what it means when the nebulizers haven't worked and they start giving adrenaline. I know what the defib patches mean, and I know none of it's good. I remember passing out really slowly, and as I closed my eyes I genuinely thought I was going to die and I'd never open them again. To come around in the ICU later in with the same colleague by my side was the best feeling. He saved my life undoubtedly. My friend and I were eating burgers in a darkly lit area on a street in Seattle when a man walked straight up to us with his hands in his pockets, gesturing like he had a gun. He says, "Give me your money." I immediately pretended to be drunk and got all chummy with him and said, "If I had money that would be amazing," and the guy looked around and then walked off. No idea if that was smart or incredibly stupid, but I definitely realized in that moment that when your mind is in fight or flight, you have little control over what your brain is going to do. When I was at an outdoor range with a few friends and one guy a few people down had a misfire in his 7mm Magnum. He pulled the trigger, no bang. He then turns around, muzzle sweeps everyone to his right, including me, and the guy behind him grabbed the gun, pointed it down at the dirt in front of Mr. Dumbus, and the round went off. No one got hurt, but me and a few other people sat down to take a break after that, and Mr. Dumbus was promptly escorted off the range by a, rightfully so, pissed off row. Misfires are always nerve-wracking, and I've always been taught to hold it on target for 30 seconds before attempting to clear it, and always leave the muzzle pointed down range when you do, and Mr. Dumbus and his 7mm Magnum that had a slow burn or something really drove that point home. When I was 11 I experienced anesthesia awareness during a surgery on my mouth. I was under, but I wasn't. I could smell and feel everything, and I was hallucinating from the ketamine they gave me. Thought the doctors had killed me and I was in hell. Almost crashed in a helicopter. When the pilot started to freak out, that's when I knew we were in trouble. When my ex-husband broke down the bathroom door and put a gun to my head and threatened to redecorate the bathroom with my blood and brains. It took almost a year to squirrel away enough money to leave. I haven't seen or heard from him in 25 years. I hope his life sucks. Was going to a market, gave a thumbs up to a dude in a nice car. And he pulled a pistol on me. I was maybe 12. Nice. The night my dad got so drunk and angry he came at me with a kitchen knife. I was doing field mapping for a company I will not mention in the middle of nowhere Central Texas. This was during one of the hottest summers on record, and miserable outside would have been giving it a compliment. It was hell on earth. Alright, so I was doing my field work on an ATV and mapping rural electric utilities as the terrain was extremely rough and unforgiving. ATVs were the only way to do your work effectively. This day in particular was excessively hot, 111°F, with no wind. I'm a bigger guy and not afraid of too much, but I had the creepiest feeling looking at this dirt driveway that stretched around a mile on some redneck-looking land that had rusted cars etc. I get to the top of a hill on the property and spot my asset to map about a quarter mile away that was surrounded by dilapidated trailer homes. I drive my ATV close to what appeared to be a compound and dismount. I immediately felt uncomfortable as there were literally 20-30K beer cans surrounding the property. They were using this as a makeshift security system, so intruders would make tons of noise. We had a letter from the sheriff and the company stating we could be there to map the utilities, so I said my name, company name, purpose, and went about my business. I then followed the electric lines around through their backyard and waded through the beer cans to reach the asset so I could map the unit. I look over and there is a clearing in the beer cans with a chair. I take a close look and see piles and piles of animal bones. The crazy fucks that lived at this place were eating whatever type of animal they could get their hands on and leaving the scraps to rot in their backyard. I then get the most uneasy you're being watched and possibly cannibalized feeling I've ever felt. I then turned my head and immediately locked eyes with an eyeball in the broken Venetian blinds behind a window in one of the trailer houses. We both paused, stared, then the blinds closed. This all took place in about 2 seconds. I then ran like hell, hopped on my ATV, said fuck safety, and drove like someone in a Honda Motorsports advertisement. I escaped the compound. Mind everyone, I had a old lady point a shotgun at me on a separate occasion and was bitten by a copperhead, but that compound was easily more terrifying than that. I quit shortly afterward and so did most people on my team. Fucking around on people's property in the middle of nowhere Texas is a suicide mission, even if you have the law's permission. Aged 8 or 9, I went on a field trip to a water park. The main attraction was the wave pool, and it was severely overcrowded. When the bigger waves came in, I went under and about 5 others people landed on top of me, effectively pinning me underwater. A lifeguard saw it, luckily, and saved me, but holy fuck, I'll never forget that sensation of helplessness as I drowned. When my mother told me to do chores and I held them off until the moment I hear the garage door opening. When my oncologist stopped saying the growth and started calling it the cancer and followed up with, "Now I'm gonna have to figure out how to save your life." Fortunately for me, he figured it out. When I was a Boy Scout, we were backpacking in the Eagle Cap Wilderness area of eastern Oregon. We tried to make it up Glacier Pass, but the trail was completely snowed out still in July. We turned around and stopped at the first meadow we found to eat some lunch. About 15 minutes go by, and our scoutmaster very calmly tells us to stand up and put our backpacks on because we needed to leave. I look in the direction the scoutmaster is looking, and there is a very large cougar staring at us from across a shallow creek. We started down the trail and I looked back towards the cougar to see if it had moved. That damn cat was crossing the creek and following us. We kept moving and kept looking back to see it occasionally. The cougar followed us for about 3 miles before we lost track of it. That night, we had a decent-sized campfire, and me and 2 of the other older boys sat up most of the night watching out for it. The next morning, we found a freshly dead animal about 100 yards from our camp. During Hurricane Harvey, me and my dad had to get some people out of Crosby, however they got I-10 shut down, so we had to take some of the back roads to get there. On the way there we got to one part of the road for a good 5 miles. The water was about 4 feet deep. My dad's truck is very big, and the water was almost going on the top of the hood of the truck from water being pushed. Dad said he's been in war zones during his time in the army, had to drop troops off near an Iraq mortar squad that was bombing our drops during the Gulf War, and he said his heart had never beat as fast. Edit. Sorry, accidentally put inches, it was feet. Edit 2. Went back to actually change the paragraph to fix inches to feet. I was 17. Wanted to take a dimmer from an old light above my bed. Was sure I had unplugged it. Hadn't. I cut the wire for the lamp and saw an incredibly powerful spark. Everything was white. The breaker for the second floor went off, so when I regained vision everything was black. I thought for sure I was dead. Cutting live wires with 220 vac. Luckily the wire cutters had rubber grips. The wire cutter were broken afterwards though, the edge had melted together from the electricity. On a tour in some mountains in Scotland. Very nice guy driving me up a mountain. It's icy as fuck. All going well until the car swivels out of control and starts to pendulum towards a tree. Genuinely though, it was it. Somehow the driver stops and we just about miss the tree, crashing into a ditch. He asks me not to mention it to his boss. I tell him to drive on. Once I got hit by a car, thought I might die for like a min, but I realized I would be fine because it did not hurt that much. I was home alone and up the stairs from the kitchen. Naturally, a few plates and stuff decided to fall from besides the sink and I was scared shitless. Managed to move after 5 mins, only to realize I was still home alone. Thankfully. When I graduated from gallbladder attacks to gallbladder hell. When I would get them before, it would be horrendous, exhausting and nauseous pain for about 12 hours. Eventually they started lasting a month. I got so sick 1 month that I lost 50 pounds and had to live with my parents because I couldn't look after myself and I was scared I was going to die. Couldn't get a doctor to listen to me, took 2 years to get my surgery. Surgeon said they couldn't even see it to start with, even though it was quite enlarged as it was completely covered in adhesions. Apparently if you are getting gallbladder attacks, it already needs to come out, so don't ignore it. First year commercial seine fishing. Jellyfish are raining as we're stacking our gear back on the boat. A fucking jellyfish tentacle gets in my eye and across my face as the boat starts to lean a lot toward our fish hole. It was our biggest catch of the season, 66k plus pounds. Boat's capacity is 45k. Captain keeps yelling at me as I keep one eye open, the other one is crying, and my glasses are all fogged. I can't see shit, so I yell at him, I can't fucking see. He's still yelling me to pull down since there was a snag on the power block. All I'm thinking at this point is goddamn, I don't want to go out blind and into the ocean. Grisly encounter in Yukon, first summer job as a geologist. I had a heart attack in my sleep and it immediately woke me up, and I was in a pitch black room and drowsy from the sleep. I had no idea what was happening, straight up fell off the bed trying to get up. Literally 3 days ago I woke up in the middle of the night to see a face in my room. Someone had climbed through the window and I just happened to wake up before they had a chance to do whatever they were planning to do. I took a combination of a bunch of drugs while on a camping trip with some friends in Vermont. About 8 hours and I lost the ability to see, control my body, or feel anything. I only hear. It was terrifying. I thought I was experiencing some sort of drug overdose symptom and was dying. I can't even begin to explain to you how certain I was that I was going to die. I felt so dumb. I kept on saying to myself, wow, really dude, this is it? This is what's on your obituary? Drugs? Way to go, dude. You're an absolute cunt. It lasted for 30 minutes, I was told. Apparently in reality I just suddenly started looking in random directions and moving my body slowly in random ways and tensing some of my muscles super hard. Then I got up and started running, just running, until I fell. Then I slowly came to as my friends held me down until I was able to comprehend things normally again. Terrifying. Was at work while in uni and got this chest pain that would not go away. It was like something was pinching me, and I had already been having right leg hip pain, so once I left work I slept it off. Woke up that night, could barely walk and was in tears the whole night, wondering if something was going on. I was an idiot and should have gone to the hospital. Still not sure what it was, but a friend said that it could have been either a panic attack or a mini heart attack. Recently got my heart checked and I'm okay, but at the time it was terrifying to think I might die while I was hours away from my family. Edit. Really wasn't expecting most people to see this, but thank you for the kind words and advice. I really appreciate it and will keep all of it in mind just in case. Home invasion. Me and 5 others were smoking blunts in the living room. The house was previously rented out by a prominent drug dealer. Someone kicked in the front door around blunt 0.3. The gunmen wore bandana masks and were heavily armed with shotguns and pistols. Immediately we were all put on the ground. The owner of the house was taken into the next room and beaten with a pistol. All the while I'm staring down the barrel of this 12-gauge shotgun. One of the dudes was familiar. I'd seen his dookie dreads previously, and his voice was familiar to me somehow. Then I heard one of our assailants call out, "Antonio over here." I almost pissed my pants. Everyone in earshot realized this fuck up. For now we all realized we knew these guys, and now we all had to die. Immediately someone from our crowd comes up shooting, and I started crawling. Got to the kitchen and right out the back door. Never looked back. I lived on an artificial heart for 11 months. It was battery driven and at night I had to plug everything into the wall. The terror was real. I had a thick cord exiting my abdomen attached to a computer that controlled the pump inside my body. The computer failed on me twice, and I had to swap it out myself. When the computer unplugs, you have no blood flow. I had to experience this twice. Then I had a heart transplant. That was far less terrifying than the artificial heart. Years ago I went to Portugal with my family, and at the time I couldn't swim yet, kept doing stupid stuff in the water like going out too far, and had done stuff like that for years, even though my parents constantly told me off for it. So one day we all go to the pool, and I had a beach ball with me, so I hugged tight around it and went down the ladder right into the deep end of the pool. Pretty much right away I knew that I'd fucked up and meekly tried calling for help, but no one heard, so I attempted to paddle back to the ladder, but as I did the ball I had slipped out of my arms. Lol. Pretty much right away I went under and started struggling and panicking. I was screaming underwater and frantically trying to get up, but like I said, I couldn't swim. After what seemed like forever but was probably only like 10 seconds I felt an arm grab me and pull me out, and sure enough it was my dad. He was laughing at me, but also calling me an idiot. Lol. It turned out he'd been watching me like a hawk the very second I went into the deep end, but wanted me to learn a lesson the hard way, so when I went under he took his time getting to me. It worked though, as I don't do stupid things like that now. Just to add about my parents' method of raising me, I was a very ignorant and fearless child who'd often disobey my parents, so more times than not, they'd have to take drastic action to make me see sense. My sisters never went through the kind of stuff I did, but that's cause they were responsible enough to listen. Without my parents letting me find out stuff in a controlled environment the hard way, I'd either be dead or in prison lol. Someone in my school brought a gun and shot another student. I was literally in the worst part of the school to be in at that moment. A separate building with no security takes about 2 to 3 minutes for security to come, and I was in the second floor. Even thought I was in the second floor, I would much rather have 2 broken legs than get shot any day. As an Asian, when my exam result was about to come. When I was about 11 years old, I was home alone one day over the summer enjoying a bag of Skittles and watching TV. I tossed a bunch of them into my mouth and made them into a sort of ball, which I enjoyed to do. Then something made me laugh and I ended up swallowing it. The ball wasn't huge, but it was big enough to get stuck in my throat and causing me to be unable to breathe. It was terrifying because nobody was home to help me and I started to panic. I remembered some cartoon or TV show where a character was choking and slammed their stomach into a chair to get it to pop out, so I started throwing myself into the side of this recliner we had, and even though I probably wasn't doing it completely right, it actually worked, and the Skittle ball popped out. It was still one of the most terrifying minutes of my life because I thought I was going to die and very well could have. Now I'm a lot more careful whenever I'm eating something and I'm alone. I was in Cameroon as a missionary and got an eye infection because of my contact lenses. I went to a filthy military hospital where I was told I needed injections in my eye because the bacteria had eaten a hole in my cornea and I would likely lose my vision. I guess it wasn't my life, but it was pretty scary. Edit. To all those asking what ended up happening, I, thankfully, didn't get eye injections, flew to South Africa the next day, and then back home to the US a week later. The doctors there were great, and I've made an almost complete recovery. I still have a scar on the side of my eye where the hole was, which makes my vision a little blurry, but I'm otherwise unscathed. 1. I got thrown off a second-story balcony, fell on a couple people besides bruises and aches, everything was fine too. While on a cruise ship, water started leaking from the ceiling, turns out it was sewage from the boat, but everything was fine. The first time I smoked fake bake, when it first came out like 10 years ago. I tripped so hard I thought I was dying. I was conscious but could not move to grab my phone and call 911 if I needed to. It was terrifying. Caught in a tornado, out-izzed, no cover, just laid down in the mud and prayed. Trees fell all around me, but I managed to stay put and none landed on me. It was nuts. When I first moved to Baltimore, I got very lost extremely late at night. This was before GPS and cell phones. I ended up in a part of town that was straight up the wire and was sure I was going to get carjacked, being a young girl in my early 20s at the time. I was 12 and went to Disney World with my sister and parents for Christmas. We went in mid-December and surprisingly it wasn't overly busy for the holiday yet. We were on the safari ride and they have this one part where you drive over a bridge. Little did I know, this bridge is designed to simulate a collapse. As we drove over, the driver said this bridge needed repair, then boom, the thing starts titling while the huge truck is on it. I thought for sure I was about to die. I was thinking a million thoughts a second from the rush, then after like 4 or 5 seconds the bridge repairs itself and the expedition continues while the driver giggles at the kid who screamed for his life and silently cried for the rest of the ride. Besides that, it was dope seeing all the animals though. Yesterday, pulled out of the parking lot of my new apartment complex, right next to a sharp curve in the road, and someone came speeding around the corner and almost T-boned my car number. Every time I feel that acute pain in my chest. I had sepsis. Had to have emergency surgery to gut out the infection because the cocktail of antibiotics wasn't cutting it. I oddly wasn't scared, I was totally exhausted from fighting the infection, so I was at the point of if I die okay or if I live okay. I was in high school. My dad, who was an alcoholic, had gotten drunker than a skunk and was absolutely furious. Throughout my life up to that point I had seen him get drunk, angry, and violent many times. But I had never seen him rage like he did that night. It was a murderous fury. I understand where the legend of werewolves come from because that night it was like my dad had transformed into a viscous monster. I'd gone to my room to hide and I barricaded the door. Being a scared teenage girl with nothing but pillows, clothes, and books for blockade supplies, my barricade was highly ineffective. He forced his way into my room despite me throwing my entire weight against the door to keep it closed. He then went on a rampage. I think he ran towards me, but I don't remember. I know he came towards me, and I kept backing up until I was back into the wall. My memory of that night is very fragmented, which is really strange as I usually have a detailed memory. I hit him a couple times trying to get him to back off, but I was never particularly strong, and he was out of his mind from alcohol. I don't know if he even felt the pain as it did nothing to slow him down, though my mom said she found bruises on for him days later. He threw some things at me, like pillows, probably because those were conveniently nearby. They hurt but they didn't cause any bruises. I hid those things under my bed afterwards and didn't pull them out until after I'd been in college for 2 years. My mother and siblings were nowhere, they were home, but I don't know where they were when this was happening. I never asked. I really and truly believed he would kill me. I didn't really understand fight, flight, or freeze until that night. Weirdly, I did all those things that night. Unfortunately, none of them seemed to protect me. It was the only time in my life I was ever scared for my life, and it impacted the way I viewed the world. Husband and I were in the car at a red light on a trip. Light turns green and we noticed but had to pick something up from the floor or something before starting to move. After retrieving the soda bottle, we started to go and a giant truck stacked with raw logs blares his horn and runs through the intersection full speed 20 feet in front of us, where our sedan should logically have been. The stoplight was at the bottom of the hill and he couldn't stop in time. When I was 8 years old we had an hour in our elementary school where we could play outside. I was climbing on I don't know the English word for this, on a wall I call it Kletterwand in German. The first few times everything went fine. As I was climbing again my hands got all sweaty and I couldn't hold myself in the wall anymore. I fell 2 meters to the ground. At first I was just laying there and wanted to start to cry, but I couldn't breathe. I just couldn't breathe when I tried it again and I started to suffocate. My teacher saw me grasping for air and called the ambulance. They later found out that I broke my back or spine. My English isn't that good on 3 different spots, and that was the reason my lungs wouldn't work. It got better after a few days. I'm glad that I still can walk. I, 12 back then, was texting with a friend of my brother, adult, but turned out the guy was a pedophile and he knew my address. When I told him off he went extremely mad and I was scared that he is gonna show up on my house. My brother went to the police with me. I once got lost during a school day where we walked around my Vitten and at the end of the day they told us to walk in a direction and we would eventually get back to the school. Long story short, that wasn't helpful. I panicked and eventually got help from a kind kindergarten teacher at a local, well you know, kindergarten who drove me back to my school where a small manhunt had started for me. It wasn't necessarily that I was scared for my life, but I was very concerned. I was in PE class in my sophomore year and we were allowed to play what we wanted and had free time. My friends and I saw an empty shopping cart they had out where kids can grab any ball they wanted for activities, so, foolishly, we decided to mess around. I got on the front of the cart facing my friend who was pushing me at a very intimidating speed and let go of the cart. All I knew was that I wanted to get off and I thought maybe if I jumped off and tried to land softly it would work. I jumped off but the speed was too much and I fell hard on the floor, hitting my head. Instantly my vision became blurry, my hearing became rather impaired, or it sounded as if I was hearing noise from underwater, and I became extremely lightheaded and my speech became very incoherent. The feeling lasted for about a minute, but it felt like an eternity. Fortunately, no long-lasting effects occurred after what felt like a bat to the head. When I was at work, retail job mind you, I was at register and suddenly got very dizzy before a really sharp pain went from my neck down to my left hand, it went numb. Apparently there was a very visible flinch I had done from that pain. Customer asked if I was okay, I said yes. I needed the money, so I stayed quiet. It hurt to breath, my arm to my neck still hurt, my speech sucked, and my vision dragged, so I had to turn my head to look at things. I wanted to call for the store manager so I could go sit down, but we were swamped, I had to push through. I had to watch my numb hand to make sure I grabbed something while scanning. I felt if I didn't keep pushing the dizzy feeling in my head would take over, or I would fall over. Most of all of it faded within 20 or so minutes, vision being dragged behind was still there until much later. Spoke to store manager as the store was closed. She said that sounded like a mini stroke. She chewed me out for not saying anything sooner and had me drink some water. She said it could have been due to stress, but a young woman shouldn't be having any kind of stroke, even what it was. I apologized and told her I would get some rest to relax and remove some stress. I was so scared to those words, just turned 24 and almost having a stroke. Please be kind to retail workers, we don't have the money to go to the hospital if we do have a stroke or heart attack at work. I used to work early mornings and one day driving to work on an empty street, I got pulled over by the cops across the street from a cemetery. This was right around that time where you couldn't go a month without hearing another black person being killed by police. As a 20-something black man, I was terrified. I was choking on extremely stretchy cheese from a pizza, coughed it up and tried to eat it again and choked. First time I had a real panic attack. Went to the emergency room in tears, of course I was fine aside from being the most scared I've ever been in my life. Oh god, where to begin? First story. At like 13 I had this fucking psychotic stepmom and my sister and I were playing with Legos in the basement. Meanwhile, upstairs my toddler sister had apparently woken up and was wandering around and breaking things. We pondered going up to check on her but, and I said, her parents can take care of her. Well, about 10 minutes later my stepmom came down shrieking at us saying that my sister had gotten into their tobacco because they stuff their own cigs and take such good care of that shit. She claimed that she heard us say, I don't want to take care of her, and some other stupid shit. Anyway, this bitch picked up a drumstick and walked toward my sister and probably the only time I've ever done anything heroic cool in my life, I grabbed this big ass dowel rod thing and whomped her in the face just as she got ready to strike us. I came home a few days later, stayed at a friend's house, and she had been put in her place by my dad and grandparents. Next story. Some jailbird kid threatened me and some other classmates with a knife at school last year, and as he approached this chick from my history class, a teacher, my favorite teacher, just freight trained the kid into a wall. For some reason, even though the situation was ended, the school went into lockdown after. Briefly was scared for my life, but got a good laugh out of it afterward. Last story. During summer break of last year we stayed in Manhattan for a day and night. At one point while wandering the sidewalks, being a true tourist, we stopped on a corner waiting to cross the road. There was only 4 or 5 seconds left on the walk signal, so we figured we'd just wait it out. Meanwhile a dude walked right past us into the crosswalk, and as he passed another guy coming toward us he just collapsed. The guy coming toward us had apparently nonchalantly stabbed him 3 times in the torso and just kept walking, right past a ton of cars, taxis, and right past us. We thought for sure we were fucked, I mean there were 3 of us, but none of us were armed, and 2 of us were old, my grandparents. Edit. Punctuation second edit. People are having trouble deciphering my weird writing patterns for the last story, so this is kind of a summary. A guy was stabbed on a crosswalk that we were about to cross, and the guy who stabbed him walked right past us, even though we were clearly unarmed witnesses. A gang from a different town was having group fight with our town. I stupidly got involved and only me and let's say 9 others showed up. Turned out their town was quite large. Twice I was certain I was going to die, both in the army. Once while training I was given the wrong parachute, so my ripcord was too long. Like the song goes, jump on out and count to 4? Except for me it was 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 6 7 ofic. Before pulling my reserve and being laughed at after my main deployed as well. Second time was when my platoon loaded up into a helicopter after a long mission in Afghanistan, took off, and promptly got shot right the fuck down. Straight up and straight back down again. Luckily the enemy was apparently not prepared to actually shoot us down because while they assaulted the bird, the push wasn't really that big and we were able to get picked up by another bird shortly after. We had tons of air assets while waiting though. Like within minutes there were F-16s and A-10s buzzing around us, Apaches, a drone, and when it started to get darker, a C-130 gunship provided a security. Which meant basically within minutes of getting shot down the enemy had broken off their attack and we had to sit there the rest of the time, wondering if they would come back. That fall down though, feels like it took like 20 minutes, even though it was probably like 10 seconds. Working as an EMT and having a knife pulled on you at 3 a.m. in BFE with no police or fire backup. Went home and cried in my mom's arms. I had already worked almost 12 hours, so the adrenaline was mostly gone. I just stood there waiting to get stabbed. My partner was already in the back with a patient. Thankfully, he opened the door to ask me something and startled the lady enough for me to jump in the front and drive. When I was left behind on Mars and had to figure out how to grow potatoes. My sister tried to stab me when we were kids. I thought it was a joke at first when she picked it up, so I said, "What are you gonna do, stab me?" Well, she tried. She lunged at me and I grabbed her by the wrist and ripped the knife out of her hand and threw it into the sink. She runs off. Then it hits me, she just tried to kill me. And I just lean onto the kitchen counter as my eyes tear up. Then my mom walks in screaming, "Why did you try and stab your sister?" I look at her confused and then my sister walks in behind my mom. I realize pretty quickly this bitch just told my mom that I tried to stab her. I say nothing and just leave. When I came back, I tried to explain to her, but to this day she still believes her. Bungee jumping. Played it down beforehand, figured it couldn't be much worse than a rollercoaster. Was not prepared for the intense feeling of certain death once I started falling towards the ground. My mom used my full name once.